as Marina said, continuing with these talks about the voice of the silence, we are going to explore the second fragment today, which is entitled The Two Paths. So, although there is not a real continuity between these three fragments, as we said, there is I don't know if Blavatsky tried to make them, look like more continuous. So there is a kind of opening paragraph or verse that takes on, in a sense, from the previous fragment. In the previous fragment, we have seen how a person, through this process of meditation, realized truth. And the first verse takes on from there. Now that a person is enlightened, the question is, what is this person going to do? So the verse says, "And now, O teacher of compassion, point thou the way to other men. Behold, all those who knocking for admission await in ignorance and darkness to see the gate of the sweet law flung open." The voice of the candidate: "Shall not thou, master of thine own mercy, reveal the doctrine of the heart?" The doctrine of the heart is like the esoteric doctrine. "Shall thou refuse to lead thy servants unto the path of liberation?" So the first idea that comes here is that once a person gets to enlightenment, has the possibility of becoming a teacher to lead others who are still in darkness. And this is the main topic in this fragment. So the teacher says, "Who shall first hear the doctrine of the two paths in one, the truth unveiled about the secret heart," which is the esoteric doctrine, "the law which, shunning learning, teaches wisdom. This law reveals a tale of woe. The path is one, disciple, yet in the end is twofold." And these two paths are called the open path and the secret path, as we are going to see. At one end, at the end of one of these paths, bliss immediate. At the other, bliss deferred. The first one leadeth to the goal, the second to self-immolation. The choice is thine. So the idea is that there is a path of spiritual development, but close to the end, that path divides in two. One is called the open path, and the other is called the secret path. And as you have seen, there were some references to the esoteric doctrine. The idea is that the open path is a path that is taught to the masses in every religious teaching. The path of being virtuous and developing a spiritual nature and little by little reach the final liberation. The secret path is a path that is not taught so openly in religious teachings, which has to do with reaching the goal but giving up the fruit of the spiritual path, which is liberation from suffering, liberation from the conditioning. So giving up that fruit to remain in touch with humanity and teach others. So this is why one says, the verse says that one path leads to bliss immediate and the other to bliss deferred. And one leads to the goal of liberation and the other to self-immolation. to immolate oneself is like self-sacrifice, in a sense. And we are going to see how this happens. So the open path leads to the changeless change, nirvana, the glorious state of absoluteness, the bliss past human thought. Thus, this first path is liberation. The open way, no sooner hast thou reached its goal, will lead thee to reject the bodhisattvic body, and make thee enter the thrice glorious state of Dharmakaya, which is oblivion of the world and men forever. In Buddhism, there is this idea of the three kayas, or bodies, or vestures, that the spiritual person has. One is called Dharmakaya, another one is called Sambhogakaya, and the third one is Nirmanakaya. And I don't want to enter into too much into this subject because it is pretty complex. But the idea is that the Dharmakaya body, it's a state of consciousness where the self is merged with the all, and where all the lower vehicles of consciousness are rejected, are left aside, are dissolved. So this person becomes one with the all, but it becomes unable to remain in touch with what is separate. Of course, we can understand this at the verbal level, but it's difficult to understand what this really means. Nevertheless, the idea is that those who chose to be merged completely in nirvana, they have not the possibility of being in touch with the world at all. But there is a second possibility, which is the path of renunciation. And this is called the path of woe. The secret path leads the Arhat, which is enlightened being, to mental woe unspeakable, woe for the living dead, and helpless pity for the men of karmic sorrow. The fruit of karma, sages they are not still. For it is written, teach to eschew all causes, but the ripple of effect, as the great tidal wave, thou shalt let run its course. The secret way leads also to the paranirvanic bliss, but at the close of kalpas without number. Nirvanas gained and lost from the boundless pity and compassion for the world of deluded mortals. So the idea is that this second path, the path of renunciation, is the renunciation of nirvana. And it's called the path of woe, not of a personal suffering, but the suffering that an enlightened being feels, which is full of compassion, this enlightened being, and the suffering that is there of seeing people suffer. Again, the kind of suffering that an enlightened being goes through is different from our personal suffering. But nevertheless, it is said that there is a profound compassion at the lower levels. You know, when an enlightened being is dwelling on the real self, then everything is seen from the absolute point of view. But these kind of enlightened beings that decide to remain involved with the world of conditioning, with the relative world, they have bodies and they are more limited while working through the bodies than if they were blend, with the all in nirvana. And they are more involved with the illusory world, trying to help people on these lower planes. On the higher planes, nobody needs any help. Everything is perfect. The self it's always perfect. But maybe we could see it as a person that is going through a nightmare. That nightmare is not real. If he's dreaming that he's being chased, nobody's really chasing him. This is something that his mind is generating. But the person is suffering. The suffering is real. And we can know that nothing will happen to that person, that even if in the dream that person is caught and killed, nothing will really happen to the body. But the person is still suffering. So maybe we would want to wake him up so that he doesn't suffer. So maybe it's something like this. The enlightened beings know that nothing can happen to the real self. But on the plane of illusion, we all suffer, and they are committed to try to help humanity to get rid of this false view, to get rid of the cause, the origin of this nightmare. And it is what they can do, it's very limited, because in this view, in the theosophical view, there is not possibility of a savior. You know, somebody that will come and set right all things that we couldn't set right. Or somebody that will release us from ignorance or from sin. The idea here is that we may have teachers, we may have help. The enlightened beings are really important in humanity, but we all have to take care or be in charge of our own development, spiritual development, or our own awakening. Because this is a process of growing. It's like a parent cannot grow for the child. The child has to grow by himself. That's the purpose of life, you know, from the physical point of view. You are a child and you have to go through a process of growth until you become an adult. Now, the parent can help a lot. If the kid were by himself, life would be very tough. But the parent can help a lot, but still cannot grow for the child or prevent the child from going through certain situations. So this is said here regarding karma. The enlightened beings in the theosophical view and in this Buddhist view, which these fragments are supposed to come from, in this view, the enlightened being cannot undo the karma, and we have to suffer and we have to rejoice according to the causes that we created, not because there is punishment and reward in the universe, but simply because it's the result of the actions. You know, if I put my finger on fire, naturally it will burn, because that's action, you know, cause and effect. That's how things work. So if we do wrong things, that will generate suffering, because that's the way things are. And the idea here is that the enlightened being can teach how to stop producing these causes, but cannot prevent a person from producing them and from suffering the effects.
Can I interrupt you for a second?
Yeah, okay, I will repeat the comment. Yeah.
Does the Theosophic view think that enlightened beings are scarce, that there's very few of them?
Mm-hmm. The question is if the Theosophical view sees that the amount of enlightened beings are scarce, or they are many. And there is not a real information about that. Sometimes people would ask, you know, Leadbeater, Bessa, and Blavatsky, and there were never a real answer, as far as I am aware of, about a number or more or less something that could give us an idea. I think the idea is that there are comparatively few, because even if there are, you know, a few thousands, when you compare that with the mass of humanity, it's relatively few. At this point of evolution, it's not expected that most human beings would have reached that stage of perfection. Because we are, in the Theosophical view, we are only halfway of our spiritual journey. So the idea is that they are not many, but what the number is, we don't know.
The reason I'm asking is because this talks about, you know, what an enlightened being can or cannot do, or what we can benefit from an enlightened being. And if we're never going to meet them, why is this relevant at all?
Mm-hmm. So the question is, this is all about what an enlightened being can do or not, and if we are not going to meet them, what's the purpose of this? Well, in the Theosophical view, the idea, all enlightened beings that remain within in touch with human evolution, whether we know it or not, they are helping humanity on the spiritual planes mainly. Some of them from time to time take a physical body and they become religious teachers or leaders even on the social or political field when a real change is needed for humanity. But that's a rare, or it's not their main role. Their main role is it's at the level of the spiritual planes, where they are trying to help the development of, or the awakening of the real self. Now, part of their role also is to look for people who could go through this, what here is called the secret path, which is like an accelerated course of evolution, so that this person can become an enlightened being faster, but only the purpose of that is only if the person is willing to become an enlightened being to help humanity. Because this is a very delicate matter. It's not that anybody can come and tell me, okay, I will grant you an awakening, faster than the rest of humanity. What means to go faster through this path is that the enlightened beings, which they know how to work with karma within the limits of karma, they take a person and in some way they can accelerate the karma, they can put certain order in the karma so that the person who is willing to take up this accelerated course on enlightenment, so to say, will burn the karmic causes faster than a normal person would. It is said, Blavatsky said that sometimes disciples burn karmic causes in one life that normally would be spread in 100 lives. I don't know if the number is symbolic or is real. But usually, as we are going to see in the next fragment, what is called the path of discipleship is really hard, really hard. It's a path that is, during a series of lives, there is a lot of difficulties, a lot of inner work, a lot of purging, the shadow that we all have. It's really an accelerated course because we are living many lives in one. And only a few prepared natures can go through that without breaking down psychologically and even physically. So these enlightened beings are very careful about proposing a person to follow this path. And they would do it only with a person that has in his or her heart the longing to, the compassion, and therefore the longing to help humanity. So the spread of these teachings, when Blavatsky started talking about the adepts, because this is an idea, this idea of that I'm talking about, these two paths, is the ideal of Bodhisattva, which was unknown in the West when the Theosophical Society was founded. The idea of the Bodhisattvas is there in the Theravada tradition, but in a different way. It's also in the Mahayana tradition of China, Japan, North India, but also not in a clear way that the Bodhisattva is a person that gives up nirvana. this is an idea that is very prominent in Tibetan Buddhism. And when Blavatsky founded the Theosophical Society, we knew very, very little about Tibetan Buddhism. In fact, when she wrote The Voice of the Silence, she got a lot of criticism by the scholars, Buddhist scholars, saying that she had invented this idea of giving up nirvana and all that. Now that we know more about Tibetan Buddhism, we see that it was actually there. But Blavatsky said that the reason why she was talking about this and the Mahatmas or Adepts, which are these bodhisattvas, was because by knowing this, it can encourage or bring to the awareness of people the need for helping humanity, that the spiritual life is not only a question of gaining your own liberation, as it is usually taught in religious teachings. And by proposing this, the person may begin to walk in that direction. In the Theosophical Society, there is a strong idea, not in every member because there is freedom of thought, but in members who study the Theosophical literature, there is this strong idea that the TS is part of what these bodhisattvas do to help the world, not the only thing, because they work with all religions and with many different movements, but that the main aim of a true theosophist is to try to grow spiritually, eventually to be able to help humanity. Now, this may be just an idea because it's read in the books, or it may really generate or awaken that aspect of compassion for humanity. And knowing that this possibility is there, the person may be more aware of that, of the need of developing compassion for people. Now, I think that this choice we are talking about is probably not a conscious choice that, the person gets enlightenment and then there are two signs, one says nirvana, the other says renunciation of nirvana. This is probably a choice that one makes little by little in the very way that the person is developing, by the very reason why this person is growing spiritually. So probably this choice is made, every lifetime, at the beginning in a very vague way, and as the person grows and the path chosen is more definite, then the choice will be more evident.
Quick question. Those that choose nirvana and they go, whatever is it that they go, what do they do there? And what is the purpose if they belong into that other world, and I guess there's not that few of them, what do they do?
Yeah. The question is, those who choose nirvana, what do they do there? We cannot understand what nirvana is. There are states that don't have any purpose in itself. I mean, for example, love. If a person never felt love, could ask, what's the purpose of feeling love? Well, there is not really a purpose. It's a state of love. There is a purpose for going to work. There is a purpose for, playing a sport. There are purposes for certain things, but for other things there are not purposes. A purpose is something that belongs probably to what in Theosophy is called the lower mind. But nevertheless, in the Theosophical view, what we call nirvana is an absolute state of unity, but that absolute state, if we can say, is relative, in the sense that within these planes of evolution, that's the absolute state, where you are one with everything at certain level of the nature of the universe. But there are wider or different, I don't know what word to use, there are deeper states of consciousness or deeper planes, and the idea is that these enlightened beings, after a period in nirvana, they have a different kind of life on deeper planes of the universe. It's difficult to explain it without entering into too detailed or technical terms. But what we call, Dhyan Chohans they call Dhyan Chohans in the Eastern tradition, or archangels. I don't want to mention archangels because we have a very, I think, personalized idea of what archangels are. But they are supposed to be messengers from God. They are not human being-like. But there are higher entities in the universe, and these enlightened beings may be part of these higher entities in the universe, having roles in the development of the universe as a whole.
But if they never went through evolution of humanity, then they wouldn't be the ones that go to nirvana after finishing.
No, yeah, we are talking about human beings that were human beings and then they reached nirvana. It's a much more complex subject because there are also rounds of evolution, so there is certain nirvana that the soul enters into, but in the next round of evolution, that soul has to come back unless it reached a very deep state of nirvana or perfection. So it's a whole thing that we don't have time to get into right now.
One more quick question.
Can we do it in the? It's related. Okay.
To that, when they go to nirvana, what if they, let's say, change their mind in about 500 years, 1,000 years? Do they have a choice to come back, or it's something that they stay there until the new evolution happens?
Well, remember that in nirvana there is no day, there is no mind. We cannot, we could speculate a lot about that, but if we try to be serious in the study, we have to know that we cannot have any idea what nirvana is. What we know is that nirvana is not what we know. That's why in Buddhism, many times nirvana is translated as, actually it means literally annihilation. It's the complete annihilation of what we know. Nothing that we know remains there. What remains there, in Buddhism, they don't want to talk about that, and they talk about emptiness. Although in some schools of Buddhism, they talk about Dharmakaya or the Tathagata Garbha, which is the Buddha nature. But the idea is that the state of nirvana is something that we cannot even conceive. Of course, they cannot change their mind because they don't have a mind or an individuality in the way that we know it. So we cannot say much more about that without just being ignorant, thinking that we can think or talk about something that is beyond our comprehension. So the idea is that as this person, from the point of view, the voice of the silence is very harsh on these beings that go into nirvana. The voice of the silence says, these are selfish people. They choose the self as opposed to the selves of everybody. And I don't know to what extent we could say that. It's probably part of the imagery that the voice of the silence is portraying to share this view. The idea of those who renounce have compassion. Those who enter in nirvana are choosing something selfishly. If you enter in nirvana, means that you give up yourself. So if there is any selfishness, it is much more subtler than what we define as selfishness. But nevertheless, the idea of this is to encourage people to begin to think about their spiritual evolution, not in a selfish way, as a way to get rid of illusion and, realize or become the whole, but to do that in order to help other people also. So, for example, in one part of the Voice of the Silence, it is said, To live to benefit mankind is the first step, and to practice the 6 glorious virtues, which means to become a yogi, is the second. So the idea here is that it's not that we shouldn't try to reach the state of enlightenment, but that's not the real aim. The real aim is to live to benefit mankind. And then because of that, we try to realize truth, because we can help humanity only if we are beyond humanity. While we are what we are kind of the blind leading the blind. I mean, we can all help each other, but the real help can be done when we are enlightened beings. You know, I don't want to put down the help that we can do here, but all our help is still on the plane of illusion. It's necessary, as we are going to see, it's part of this path. We have to start helping in whatever we can now, but if we are enlightened, then the help that we can give is completely different. It can change in a more radical way human consciousness, or accelerate the change in human consciousness. So that's why it says to live to benefit mankind is the first step, and to become a yogi or to tread the spiritual path is the second. So that's more or less the point about these 2 paths. And therefore, because of this view, this fragment of the Voice of the Silence talks a lot about compassion and about service. Service mainly at the level of teaching other people, and not teaching, but helping other people to realize truth as far as we can. You know, we ourselves didn't realize truth, but we have seen, every one of us have seen a little, and there are always people who have not seen that. So there is an encouragement to try to be engaged in helping people to see further. Now, this doesn't mean that we should go out and try to convert people or to force this truth that we think we are seeing on people. That's foolish. We cannot do it, even if we want to. We can impose an idea on people, but we cannot impose understanding or impose wisdom. So we shouldn't take it in that way. But the idea is that we should be open and aware of what needs are around and how we can help people to grow at their own pace, in their own way, not in our ways or trying to impose something. So the first idea that comes with this question of being a yogi, to retire to a forest and try to reach nirvana, is this question of detachment and, renouncing to the world. And associated with that idea is the idea that love binds you to people, and therefore you have to, break with that. So the Voice of the Silence says, if thou art told that to become an arhan, an enlightened being, thou hast to cease to love all beings, tell them they lie. If thou art told that to gain liberation, thou hast to hate thy mother and disregard thy son, to disavow thy father, and for man and beast all pity to renounce, tell them their tongue is false. Thus teach the Tirthikas, the unbelievers. Tirthikas is a way that the Buddhists call the Hindu ascetics. So there is a difference between detachment and indifference. Detachment means not to be attached, not to depend on things. When we really detach ourselves from something, what is left there is love. When we do it artificially based on an idea, we generate indifference. Because detachment means to let go of our own needs, our own voids that makes us depend or try to look for something outside to fill that void. So when you solve that, you really mature that, your needs disappear, but what is left there is love. Let's see a normal relationship between, a couple, for example, that is more easily seen, or probably between parents and children also happen. In a relationship where people have their own needs, many times conflict comes out of this tension between the needs of a person and the needs of the other person. They are asking the person to, respond to their needs. So these needs and this attachment and all this part of our human nature has nothing to do with real love. On the contrary, that is something that obstructs the ability to love. Because when we don't have so many needs, when we are a person that is more complete, we are not asking. We can love without asking or expecting people to act in certain ways to fulfill our own needs. So love is a natural aspect of our consciousness. But as I said, there is like a veil in that love. Krishnamurti used to say love is a flame, but all our needs are like the smoke that is covering the flame. When a candle is not pure and produces smoke, then you cannot see the flame. When you purify the candle, which would be our personality, then love can shine without the smoke that the personality produces. So the idea is that real detachment is not to stop loving people, but on the contrary, when there is real detachment as a result of the spiritual life and maturation and not as a result of a self-projected idea, there is real love. So the second question is a question of action or inaction. In the Eastern philosophy, in the past, the idea of evolution wasn't really there in Hinduism or in Buddhism. The idea of the soul going through a state of evolution had been, according to Theosophy, lost. Theosophy says it was a teaching that was there, but as it happens in many traditions, some teachings are lost because they are forgotten little by little. Now in Hinduism, they talk a little more about evolution. Aurobindo talked about evolution. So after when Blavatsky started talking first about evolution, and she said, this is a teaching that was there in Hinduism and Buddhism. Again, the scholars, the all-knowing scholars said that Blavatsky was making that up. But now, as I said, after Blavatsky, Aurobindo started talking about evolution, and he said this was really in the Vedas, but it was forgotten or misinterpreted. And now, in many schools of Hinduism, they would accept evolution. But the idea that they held was that the only reason why we are on earth is because of karma. Karma means action. So this means that because we act, we generate causes that are related to the lower worlds, and therefore we generate effects that will bring us back to the lower worlds. So naturally, the way to get liberated from this wheel would be to stop acting, to stop generating causes that will bring us back. From the point of view of evolution, we are here because we have to develop things. We have to develop the possibility, or we have to awaken our consciousness. So by merely staying inactive, we are not gaining any insight. We are not developing anything. That's why in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna tells Arjuna, you cannot be inactive. Because even if you don't act, if you choose not to act, that is an action that is generating karma. And also you may choose not to act physically, but if you feel, if you think, those are also causes. So forget about the idea of, inaction. But this is why many yogis, they would go to the forest and stop doing things just to stop the generation of karma. Now, by doing that, you remove yourself from society, and you are self-centered in your, your own spiritual searching. So this is something that the voice of the silence denounces. So it is said, if thou art taught that sin is born of action and bliss of absolute inaction, then tell them that they err. Both action and inaction may find room in thee, thy body agitated, thy mind tranquil, thy soul as limpid as a mountain lake. Inaction in a deed of mercy becomes an action in a deadly sin. Shalt thou abstain from action? Not so shall gain thy soul her freedom. To reach nirvana, one must reach self-knowledge. And self-knowledge is of loving deeds the child. To perish doomed is he who, out of fear of Mara, the temptations of the world, so he's doomed to perish who, because of fear of these temptations of the world, refrains from helping men. Inaction based on selfish fear can bear but evil fruit. Follow the wheel of life. Follow the wheel of duty to race and kin, to friend and foe, and close thy mind to pleasures and pain. Exhaust the law of karmic retribution. So the idea is that by running away from the world, we are not going to really reach enlightenment. And when we, as I said, when we decide not to be of help in whatever we can in the world, we are choosing, we are acting in some way. So this would be inaction in a deed of mercy. It's an action. It will produce karma. And according to the voice of the silence, it's an action in something, negative. But the idea of karma, how to stop generating karma, the idea is that we generate karma with our intentions, with our motivation, not with our actions. So first, we begin to generate good karma by having good intentions, by doing things with a good intention. This good karma will bring us back still to the wheel of birth and death and rebirth, but it will produce positive environments, positive in the sense of more conducive to the spiritual life. So in the evolution of the soul, what usually happens is that first the soul stops doing wrong things, begins to do more right things, and that generates life after life, good conditions for the spiritual development. But eventually, we have to get rid of the good causes also. And that is done by performing the action without being the actor, by performing the action in a state of awareness where we are not really acting, but our body, our emotions, and our minds are acting. And we are the witnesses of the action. That generates a space between the real self and the personality. And then any action that is performed in that state does not produce a bonding karma. So this is why it says, the voice of the silence here says, both action and inaction may find room in thee. Thy body agitated or acting, thy mind tranquil, because this state of awareness requires or comes with a tranquil mind, thy soul as limpid as a mountain lake. So this is eventually how we get rid of the karma, but that doesn't prevent us from doing the right thing. When we are in this state of awareness, it's not a state of being passive. In a state of awareness, there is a spontaneous response to what is needed. So right actions come naturally out of this state of awareness without the need of an actor, so to say. So the person in this state of awareness naturally would be there helping. Again, when I say helping, it's not that we have to become a Boy Scout. Helping is more of an attitude where our being, our actions will be in tune with helping people in whatever little thing or big thing appears in our lives. So this is why the Voice of the Silence does not recommend retirement to a forest or to a monastery or to look for your own spiritual evolution. So it says, "Believe thou not that sitting in dark forests, in proud seclusion and apart from men, O devotee, will lead thee to the goal of final liberation. Think not that breaking bone and rending flesh and muscle unties thee to thy silent self." This is a lot in Hatha Yoga in India. The idea is that if they torture the body, then they break down the consciousness of the body and they come free from it. Think not that when sins of thy gross form are conquered, O victim of thy shadows, thy duty is accomplished by nature and by men. The idea is that even if we get to purify our life, that's only half of the thing that we are supposed to do. The idea of generating this compassion is the other half. So not only by, conquering the passions of the personality, we are going to get liberation if we are not developing love or compassion. The blessed ones have scorned to do so. The Lion of the Law, the Lord of Mercy, the Buddha, perceiving the true cause of human woe, immediately forsook the sweet but selfish rest of quiet wilds. From Aranyaka, which means a hermit, he became the teacher of mankind. After he entered in Nirvana, he preached on the mount and the plain and held discourses in the cities. So the idea is that, retirement could be something necessary at certain points of our evolution, when we may, need to do the final adjustments in our consciousness. When living in the world is not necessary, it's not going to teach us any other lesson. So, a life in retirement, or part of the life in retirement may be, or in retreat, may be necessary. But always with the intention that once we realize truth, we come back to point out the way. And this is what goes on. Point out the way, however dimly, and lost among the host, as does the evening star to those who tread their path in darkness. Give light and comfort to the toiling pilgrim, and seek out him who knows still less than thou, who is in his wretched desolation, sits starving for the bread of wisdom, and the bread which feeds the shadow, without a teacher, hope, or consolation, and let him hear the law. So that's more or less the idea, of developing compassion and being engaged in the world to help others also to tread the path of spiritual evolution. And the closing words, and with this we will end, say, "Thou hast the knowledge now concerning the two ways. Thy time will come for choice, O thou of eager soul, when thou hast reached the end and passed the 7 portals." We are going to see these 7 portals in the next fragment. "Thy mind is clear. No more art thou entangled in delusive thoughts, for thou hast learned all. unveiled, stands truth and looks thee sternly in the face. And she says, sweet are the fruits of rest and liberation for the sake of self, but sweeter still the fruits of long and bitter duty. Renunciation for the sake of others, of suffering fellow men. He who becomes a Pratyeka Buddha, which is these Buddhas that reach enlightenment by their own and they don't teach. So he who becomes a Pratyeka Buddha makes his obeisance but to himself. The Bodhisattva who has won the battle, who holds the prize within his palm, and yet says in his divine compassion, for others' sake, this great reward I yield, he accomplishes the greater renunciation. A savior of the world is he. So this is the main theme in the second fragment. There are interspersed many teachings, regarding the spiritual path and the spiritual attitude, but I chose the verses that have to do with the main theme of the fragment. So is there any comment or question? And somebody will.
Thanks, Pablo. I have a question. If I understand right, you mentioned that or a basic role of Theosophy is to enlighten or advanced humanity. Is this correct?
Mm-hmm.
My question is, with dwindling membership running around less than 3,000 and falling, how is this advancing man?
First of all, since the beginning, Blavatsky and Besan and Leadbeater, the main early Theosophists, they said that Theosophy could have a wide influence only in the next 500 or 600 years. Every tradition took a long time until it got established in the world. And Christianity took 300 years or a little more. In Buddhism, the monks got together and wrote down the teachings of the Buddha like 400 or 500 years after the Buddha died. And usually it takes some time. So we don't know if that is true. We will see, or whoever is there will see in 500 years. But that's something. The idea is that what we are doing now is to build something that will be alive in 500 years. Second, this spirituality is never a question of masses. There are very few yogis, there are very few jnanis, there are very few real saints, and there are very few people that are interested in a deep spiritual life. Blavatsky said that she called the occult dynamic of energy or something like that. She said that whatever energy is spent on the higher states of consciousness, it has a deeper effect than the same amount of energy that is spent on the lower planes, on the physical plane, for example. So the idea is that people who are trying to awaken on the spiritual planes, that has an effect on human consciousness. Because there is only one human consciousness. We share this human consciousness, just like we share the atmosphere. If we find out a way to purify the atmosphere, you will purify the whole atmosphere, not the US's atmosphere. So if we purify human consciousness, that will have an effect in the whole humanity. And Krishnamurti, for example, said once that if only 80 people could realize truth, could produce a fundamental revolution in their consciousness, the whole humanity would be changed. So again, I don't think the number is necessarily real. But the point of the question is that relatively few people can have a huge impact in the world. And even Jesus said, you are like the yeast that is a little bit in the mass, and that makes the bread grow. And so hopefully what we are doing, what we are doing will have the effect that it will. Also what other real spiritual people in other religions, traditions, movement do is part of the same work that the TS is doing. And that will have the effect that we have. We cannot predict that, but I do think that we may make a little difference. But anyway, when you see that something is right, you don't do it according to the results of that. You do it because it is right. It doesn't matter that people will listen or not, that people will praise you or not, that people will understand your action or not. You do it because that's the right thing to do. So I guess that's the real question. If we see that this is the right thing to do, we have to do it. It doesn't matter how many people hear or listen to that. Diane had some question.
And to build upon that thought, eventually the choices we make is not coming from our lower nature. It'll appear through us, we as instruments. Sometimes we're not aware of where that comes, but if we live that kind of life, those choices penetrate through, like with Arjuna. It happens.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. That's part of our spiritual work, to become receptive to that. One of the things, one of the phrases that I like very much in The Voice of the Silence, that I didn't read, but I can read now. Alaya, in this tradition, means the real self. So it says, alas, alas, that all men should possess alaya, be one with the great soul, and that possessing it, alaya, should so little avail them. Behold how like the moon reflected in the tranquil waves, alaya is reflected by the small and by the great, is mirrored in the tiniest atoms, yet fails to reach the hearts of men. Alas, that so few men should profit by the gift, the priceless boon of learning truth, the right perception of existing things, and the knowledge of the non-existent. So the idea is that, yes, the real self is always influencing us, if we want to see it in this way, like higher self or real self and the illusory self. But our nature is not necessarily receptive to that. As we tread the spiritual path, we become more and more receptive. Now it's a very dangerous place, because now we have two voices, the voice of the flesh and the voice of the spirit, to use that language. And it's not always easy, or it's many times difficult to distinguish which one is the voice. So unless we are very honest, there is a possibility of saying, oh, my higher self is telling me that I should take another piece of pie. I have to flow. And that happens a lot. Blavatsky was in a meeting, and there was a woman that was talking about her higher self, this and that. And Blavatsky, that wasn't really patient, she said, ma'am, if you shut up, you will hear your higher self snoring. So we have to be careful. It's true what you say, but at the same time, we have to be careful.
Pablo, I really liked your linking detachment as basically the opposite of dependence. That it's the dependence on things and on people that detachment solves. And it's that dependence that causes the suffering, and the lack of dependence that increases the love.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, maybe the word should be different from detachment because it brings a wrong idea.